The last 2 weeks at work had been pretty darn hard, but if the cheers of my coworkers were to be believed, it's over. By the looks of it, the spring product line will be a huge success. Bosses will make more money, workers will get full-time jobs and a paycheck, and maybe even a nice overtime bonus in the coming months. Even the chances of a decent year-end bonus looked very promising. Jeff decided he could afford to just sit at the hotel bar and order 1 or 3 more beers on the company's DME. Everybody wins, he thought. The Hilton Hotel Bar wasn't his usual hangout. Jeff usually preferred more rundown establishments with dim lighting, creaky wooden floors, and preferably a layer of sawdust or nutshells on the floor, suitable for having a drink and even shaking his shoes a little if he had a pretty dance partner. Marketing had chosen this venue for an impromptu company party on Friday afternoon to celebrate the launch of this season's new product line. The Hilton had the biggest TV in the area and a large enough open bar area so people could watch the fashion show live or just sit back and enjoy the good news. It was also a good place to catch a cab home after drinking too much. The VP of sales was also trying to get one of the larger conference rooms to handle the influx of factory workers, but they were all busy at another sales seminar, so everyone was happily accommodated at the bar. Hearing their own thoughts over the chatter on the TV and cell phones was nearly impossible, but at least it was the loud and cheerful sound of prosperity. Just a few years ago, the company had been so broke that the annual company picnic had turned into a see-in day. Today, the mood was good, and everyone was happy. Some of the girls from sales and marketing were demanding more champagne, and the glass aquarium behind the bar was already half filled with car keys. A few smiling and winking couples even headed to the hotel front desk to rent a private room for a romantic celebration. Heck, after all, it was still only 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was definitely better than a real workday at the factory. Cindy, the blonde bombshell from the marketing department, who by this point was swamped with work and was herself seeking alternative entertainment, approached Jeff in 5-inch heels, showing off her ample and interesting cleavage. She offered Jeff a glass of champagne, but he declined, and she quickly found a more interested and very willing partner eager for a little horizontal partying. Jack knew that Cindy was a pleasure to make love with, even in a semi-busy state, and had tried her services a couple of times in the past. At the Christmas party, she'd done it with half the board of directors, bending over the punch table and demonstrating that she wasn't wearing any underwear. Jeff wanted to limit himself to beer for now and felt no desire to pull away from the crowd, although the idea of having a glass or 2 of whiskey in honor of the holiday was beginning to sound quite sensible. Early sales projections for this season looked good, maybe even great, but he still remembered the hard times when no one knew if the next day would be the company's last. Jeff lifted his mug of beer silently, remembering those hard times and the fact that things could have been even worse. After a few more beers and 3 fingers of decent top-notch whiskey, Jeff was almost drunk and was seriously considering leaving the party early or tracking down Cindy and asking her to go to the party, or tracking Cindy down and asking her to have fun in bed. The mood in the sales and marketing department was even more cheerful, and the fishbowl of car keys behind the bar looked pretty darn full too. He had already started to slide one tired buttock off the bar stool when he saw a sight in the doorway that he hadn't seen in 15 years. It was his ex-wife Maureen's ass. He'd recognize her anywhere. Maureen hadn't seen him yet and was talking to her husband Dave for a few minutes. Soon, he left her at the bar and headed toward the conference rooms. He was dressed in a cheap suit from a department store and appeared to have come on business related to another vendor seminar that filled most of the hotel. He looked about 20 years older and didn't shine with any particular attractiveness. He was much thinner and looked less athletic, slouching slightly in the shoulders. His graying hair wasn't much of an improvement either. There were a lot of old and mostly bad stories between them, and while Jeff probably wouldn't piss on Dave even if he was on fire, it was a little sad to see how low he'd fallen in this world. The old Dave always wore expensive European suits and looked trim and tanned, like he'd just spent the day on the golf course or tennis court. For him, image had always come before essence, and now he didn't look too impressive. That's what nearly 7 years in prison will do to you. Maureen, on the other hand, looked in somewhat better shape. It had always been expensive to take care of her, but today she was dressed much more modestly than Jeff was used to seeing her, less makeup, simple costume jewelry, and an old-style dress that looked nice but understated. She certainly wasn't at the height of fashion like she used to be. She still kept her head held high as she walked toward the bar, but perhaps there wasn't the same arrogance in her gait. When she saw Jeff at the bar, she froze, and at least 100 different emotions flashed across her face before she turned to leave. When he invited her to join him, embarrassment was replaced by awkwardness, but both eventually gave way to submission. Without meeting his gaze, she took a seat next to him at the bar and ordered a glass of wine. She started rummaging through her purse for small bills, but Jeff told the bartender to put them on her tab and keep bringing drinks. He slipped a $20 tip into the bartender's hand. Jeff looked closely at his ex-wife. She too had lost weight, and a closer look at her face revealed wrinkles that no amount of makeup could hide. Obviously, things hadn't been going too well for her lately, but there was no denying that she was still attractive. Their divorce hadn't been very pleasant, and Jeff had been very angry with her for a long time. Still, this was a woman Jeff had lived with for almost 5 years and with whom he had spent a few happy moments early in their lives. He didn't wish her well, but he didn't want her to be unlucky for the rest of her life either. His father, an old-fashioned rancher in Central Texas, had hammered his principles into Jeff from an early age: loyalty to friends, steadfastness before enemies, and compassion for the defeated and helpless. Defeating an enemy was more than acceptable, but extending a hand of friendship to him afterward was also appropriate. Hold no grudge, he had been taught. Morin seemed to fit that last category, though most of her troubles were caused solely by her own actions. Karma, of course, could be bad. It seemed like only yesterday she had left him. Funny how time slips away from you. Jeff met Morin when he was still in college in Texas. He was on a half-scholarship and working 2 jobs to pay his tuition, while Morin's wealthy family in Dallas paid her full tuition. Of course, Jeff was the more serious student, as Morin spent most of her free time socializing with her rich, partying friends and caring little about her studies. How it happened that they fell in love with each other and had a serious long-term affair, no one could ever understand. Jeff was a serious and practical business student in old, worn jeans and cowboy boots who had seen a lot of real cowboys. Morin was an outgoing and fun-loving liberal arts student who dressed to the hilt even in everyday life and liked to shop at the best stores. She was very demanding of herself both financially and emotionally. Be that as it may, their love strengthened and grew on this rather rocky ground, and they married right after graduation, much to the dismay of both parents. Jeff's father thought Morin was too frivolous and wasteful to be a worthy wife, and he was right. Morin's family thought her partner was just as socially unsuitable, since Jeff had no money or connections, and they were partly right too. After graduation, Jeff worked for her parents for 2 years in a lower management position at one of their companies, but he didn't like the work or the fact that they were constantly showing him their superiority. Then, he unexpectedly received a job offer up north in the Rust Belt of Ohio for a middle management position in a small struggling shoe factory, and to everyone's dismay, he accepted it immediately. The new salary was small and the benefits minimal, but Jeff saw some promise in the opportunity and quit immediately, to the anger and annoyance of almost everyone. Morin was furious but reluctantly followed her husband. This was the last straw for her highborn family, and they stripped her of her allowance and family credit cards, leaving her to exist only on Jeff's limited income. Unsurprisingly, their relationship began to have serious problems almost immediately afterward. He loved the challenging work at Hudson Boots and Shoes Incorporated, but keeping the factory running every month was a constant challenge. For every problem solved, there were at least 2 more hidden ones. The owner, Ralph Hudson, was a decent boss, but his knowledge of modern accounting and business management techniques was virtually non-existent. Plus, he had a heart condition that limited his time and attention to important details. The factory was losing money every month, and all the accounts were kept on paper and without much of an accounting system. Sales were decent but not exceptional, and expenses somehow always exceeded income. It took Jeff several years to track exactly where all the money was disappearing to. There was waste and inefficiency everywhere, But the most serious losses were going into the pockets of sales manager Dave Weston, his main managerial competitor in the company. Every time Jeff suggested something to improve the company's performance, he was sure that Dave would come up with the exact opposite point of view. He was a proponent of the status quo in the company and opposed any form of modernization or computerization of accounting. And now Jeff knew exactly why. It soon became clear that the two men were irreconcilable rivals in the struggle for control of the company's future, and Jeff began to dislike the smirk that appeared on Dave's face every now and then, as if he were enjoying some private joke at Jeff's expense. Jeff prepared very carefully for each meeting with management and was soon winning more boardroom battles than he was losing. But because of this, he had to work long hours and didn't give Maureen as much attention as she was used to receiving. Their home life began to suffer almost immediately. Dave led a very expensive lifestyle, and Jeff estimated that he had been building the company out of about $70,000 a year for at least the last 5 years, and possibly longer. He ran the sales and purchasing departments, always dressed in expensive suits, owned at least 3 expensive Rolex watches, and drove a fancy BMW convertible. This was despite the fact that his salary was barely more than Jeff's. Kickbacks from our customers and suppliers for everything he bought or sold. The quality of leather the company was getting was steadily declining, and our costs were rising. We now knew why sales were slowly declining, and expenses were steadily rising. Needless to say, his personal expenses were also excessive to say the least, and indicated that Dave had been living comfortably off the company all these years. Convincing company owner Ralph Hudson to fire Dave wasn't easy, as everyone in the company was fascinated by the chatty thief Dave. But in the end, the evidence of Jeff's investigation, with the help of a team of financial auditors and a couple of independent private investigators, could not be denied, and Dave was finally fired. This should have been a great triumph for Jeff. He had eliminated his main rival in running the company and was now promoted to become the new director of operations with a small pay raise. But when he got home, he was even more surprised. Maureen had moved out and left him for Dave. It shouldn't have been such a big shock. Maureen had always been one of Dave's biggest supporters, and she had liked him from the beginning. She liked his temper and swagger, and was constantly trying to get Jeff to follow suit. At some point, they had an affair, probably around the same time, over a year ago, when Dave's smirk became permanent on his face. It used to only elicit a chuckle from Jeff, but now it didn't seem so funny anymore. There had been some discussion of bringing fraud and theft charges against Dave, but in the end, Ralph Hudson had declined. He was not such a forgiving man, but the company's extremely precarious financial position could not bear the strain of a public investigation or fraud trial. Even the slightest hint of the chronic financial mismanagement the company had faced for nearly a decade would have been enough to cause suppliers to stop lending to the business, effectively dooming it to ruin. Instead, it was decided that everyone would keep the fraud secret, keep their mouths shut, carefully restructure the company from top to bottom, and pray that it would be saved from bankruptcy in time. Jeff had heard very little from Dave and Maureen. They left town right away, and she filed for a quickie divorce in Vegas before leaving. She completely cleaned out the family bank accounts and took out a large loan secured by their home as part of the divorce settlement. She wanted another $10,000 for moving expenses and a large amount of monthly alimony. Jeff filed a counterclaim for fraud for the illegal loans secured by the house, showing that his signature on the loan document was forged and proving that the fingerprints on the document belonged to Dave, not him. Took some time, but the family court judge denied her requests for alimony and moving expenses and refused to impute to Jeff the obligation to pay Maureen's numerous legal fees. In the end, both Maureen and Dave pleaded guilty to fraud. Both received a stiff sentence and probation with no jail time. Maureen was allowed to keep all the money she had previously taken, though it was long spent anyway with no hope of repayment. The divorce went through, and they went their separate ways. No one was happy with the final verdict, and Jeff's legal fees left him destitute for several more years. Nevertheless, it closed the door on that painful period of Jeff's life. About 2 years later, Jeff learned that Dave had taken his old job back at a new company in California, and was once again caught with his hand in the cookie jar. At this time, Dave had quickly married Maureen, apparently so that she, as his wife, could not be forced to testify against him. This time he was prosecuted, and at the sentencing hearing, details of some of his previous frauds were put into evidence. He was sentenced to 14 years in state prison and was required to serve at least 5 before parole. In addition, his probation in Nevada had been revoked due to a parole violation, and upon release, he would have to serve 2 more years there for an old forgery offense. Jeff didn't feel the slightest pity for him. Dave was vicious to the core, and he had gotten what he deserved. He was surprised to find that Maureen had actually waited faithfully for him all those 7 years Dave had spent in prison. He couldn't help but wish she had been at least half as faithful and devoted to him when they married. Love is such a strange thing. "Well, Maureen, it's been a long time. You look lovely," Jeff said. "I think I'm all right," she replied. "You still look the same, like you haven't changed much. Maybe a little heavier and grayer, but it suits you. You look good. It seems like just yesterday we were together, maybe arguing about something stupid. It's funny how time speeds up with age," Jeff said. Maureen agreed, and for a few minutes, they drank their drinks in silence. "I noticed Dave in the hallway with you before you came in. Are you two still together?" Jeff asked. She nodded. "We're here for a seminar for salesmen tomorrow. They're giving him some minor award for selling the most appliances in his neighborhood last quarter. Now he's getting better. He's always been a good salesman, but now he's gotten his life in order and is working hard. It was very hard for us for a while, but things are slowly getting better now. After you left, the factory became very difficult. Dave left us in a very bad position, and we almost closed the doors for good. Now, looking back, he regrets it. In fact, we are grateful that Hudson decided not to press charges. It would have been a 3rd strike against Dave, and he would still be in jail. While he was in jail, I had to go to work to support myself and pay his legal bills. I'm not used to it, and I can't say I like it even now, but I've learned to respect people who have to work to make a living." "Did your family cut you off from home?" Jeff asked. She nodded again and finished her wine. The bartender, who had gotten a good tip, immediately filled the glass again. They liked Dave a lot at first, and they'd paid most of the divorce costs. But when his other legal problems started, they literally severed their relationship with him. He borrowed a lot of money from them, which I only found out about after he was in jail. He also openly cheated on me several times during this time, and they were angry that I kept forgiving him. After his release, he was mostly faithful to me, but there were occasional times when he disappointed me. Nevertheless, we tried to work through it. I tried to pay back at least some of what I owe, but my letters home always come back unopened. Come on, say it. Mom and Dad were always arrogant, and they only started liking you after you were gone, Jeff said. Maureen laughed and agreed. Old man Hudson wanted to hang Dave's balls on the wall, but shortly thereafter, he had another massive heart attack and was forced into full retirement. He moved to Florida to devote himself fully to fishing and left the reins of the empire to his daughter, Carla. Crazy Carla, the one who lived in Greenwich Village in New York City, went to art school and specialized in radical feminism. That's the one. Long black hair, very gothic appearance, with piercings wherever she could. She used to be an unconventional woman who hated men and anything remotely resembling capitalism. Responsibility did her good. She studied fashion design and discovered she had a knack for it. Since taking over the company, she has completely redesigned our entire range and has made our women's collection a hit in Milan. Almost every season for the past few years, the big Milan shoe fashion shows and the biggest fashion and style channels regularly show our latest collections, performed by the best models in the world. Now, almost all the major fashion houses in Paris use our shoes in their shows. You may not read Vogue as much anymore, but they have a very high opinion of us and consider us one of the biggest guys. Today's show was live from London and featured the new Gloria Regina lingerie line, during which each model wore our shoes, from slippers and sandals to shoes. We were all there watching the show on the big screen, counting the number of happy shoppers in the audience. We no longer have to sell at Walmart or Kmart. Now we're at Macy's, Neiman Marcus, and hundreds of other boutiques around the world. Oh, she said, focusing on her glass of fresh wine for a while. So, you're doing well then? Are you still the director of operations and running things? She asked. I'm still running the business, Jeff replied. Carla is the owner and our head designer, but she lets me run everything. She still doesn't really like to socialize with people. Admittedly, a few years ago when I married Carla, they changed my title a bit. Technically, I'm co-owner now, but I prefer to just be called the boss. You married Crazy Carla? Morin asked, nearly spilling her drink. I thought you said she was unconventional. She was, Jeff said with a laugh. We had to work very closely together for several years to get the company out of the trash heap it was in. For a while, we spent 16 hours a day together, every single day. We eventually gravitated toward each other and decided to make our bond stronger. She learned to tolerate old Western music, and I learned to tolerate her love of the avant-garde. It works. Sometimes, she even goes to dances with me, or one of her friends goes with me instead. Now, with the kids coming along, getting outdoors is getting a little harder. When she's home, she likes to play mommy, because she's a great mom to all the kids. Do you and Carla have children? Morin asked. We have 2 kids, and she wouldn't mind having another one before we stop, Jeff said. He reached into his wallet, pulled out an accordion-folded photo folder, and pulled out the first 2 pictures. Here's Jack. He's 8, and his 6-year-old sister, Charlotte. They are our oldest, and the only ones who live at home with us. Are there any others? Where do they live? I'm confused, Morin asked. Jeff smiled and started laying out more pictures. Many of Carla's friends are non-traditional-oriented girls, but that doesn't mean they don't want to have children of their own or don't mind dating a man once in a while to have them. Carla treats her friends very well and helps them with their personal problems. Jeffrey is 5 years old, and his mother is one of Carla's oldest friends from New York. Amanda is also about to turn 5, and her mom is a famous mannequin maker who I'm sure you'll recognize. I'm also helping her with her other youngest daughter, Carrie, who is 2. I think she wants a 3rd child as well, and she is going to be visiting us for a long time this summer. Jeff posted 3 more pictures, but Morin was already in complete shock. You have 5 kids with 3 different women, and your wife approves of that? We have a very unconventional relationship, but we're happy. She loves kids, the more the merrier. Not that they all live with us, but I see them. Sometimes when they come to visit, Jeff continued, I knew my wife would cheat on me with other women repeatedly and often, so we each have our freedom and I can have my own mistresses. I think it's good that she is honest about it and shares with her friends. Often, it makes the relationship more trusting. It's certainly better than finding out my wife was having an affair in an empty house. I've always felt uncomfortable about it. We should have handled the situation better and parted ways. I was going to write and apologize, but time slipped away, and I never did. Her glass was empty again, and Jeff signaled for them both to pour another drink. They drank in silence for a while, but then his BlackBerry beeped with an incoming message. He looked at it and laughed. Look what my dear wife is bringing home for me tomorrow, he said, showing Morin the message and the attached image. It was a very candid picture taken with a cell phone camera of 2 beautiful women lying together in bed. This is her new supermodel girlfriend, whom she met on the catwalk in London last week. She's already managed to get her into bed. They met again in Milan, and now she's going to bring her home tomorrow to have a threesome for a week or 2. I just love the way my wife takes care of me. Morin drank the rest of her drink in one gulp and stared at her empty glass for a while before starting to say goodbye and walk away. Jeff, it was good to see you again. And I'm glad you're doing well, but I have to go and see Dave. I can see that you've found happiness in your life since I left. I wish you well, but we are not likely to come back here again. They hugged briefly, and Jeff pulled out all the money left in his wallet, several $100 bills, and squeezed it tightly into Morin's hand, not taking no for an answer. Take this and treat yourself to a nice dinner tonight or later when you get home. Buy yourself something nice. He may be trying to mend his ways, but the old schemer and deceiver is still inside him. Dave was a rat in an expensive suit and will remain a rat in a cheap one. Draw a line in the sand and make him stick to it. Next time he cheats on you, kick him out the door. You are better now than you were then, and you don't deserve it. Kick him to the curb and be strong. At worst, you can cry to your seemingly wealthy ex-husband. Call me and I'll help. Plane ticket, job and a clean start on me. Not a loan but a gift from an old college friend. We were friends once, long before we blew it by getting married. God bless you, Morin. With one last hug, she left the bar, still clutching the $300 gift tightly in her fist. She wanted to throw it back in his face, but he hadn't offered it out of malice or twisted humor, and she really needed the money. Dave had been drinking again, and the meager savings she'd stashed at home in an old cookie jar for a rainy day had suddenly disappeared a few weeks ago. The bills had started piling up again. Perhaps the old, bad Dave had come back to her, and she wasn't sure she could deal with it. Reconnecting with her ex was making her massively uncomfortable. She'd hurt him, wounded him, but he'd gotten off the ground and succeeded. If only she trusted him and had the patience to wait, she could live the life of wealth and privilege she'd always dreamed of, and the children. Those children. She'd waited too long for them, for better times to come. Judging from the pictures, Jeff had had some awfully beautiful children, and they could have been her children instead. For reasons she couldn't explain or understand to this day, she had abandoned ship at the first opportunity. But soon, she found herself in a much worse situation than the one she had been in before. Almost from the beginning, Morin had been tempted to go back to Jeff and ask for forgiveness, but her pride and arrogant ego had prevented her from doing so. What a silly girl she had been in those days. Morin missed her planned shopping tour of the city with the other wives. She sat quietly alone in the hotel restaurant, drinking coffee and reflecting on the mess she had made of her life. Besides, she had very little money of her own to spend on frivolous purchases these days, and window shopping held little appeal for her at the moment. Watching the hotel lobby from the restaurant, she wasn't surprised to see her husband, Dave, emerge from one of his early morning sales seminars in the company of a blonde woman. Together, they took the elevator up to her room, where they stayed from 2:30 until almost 5:00, just before Morin was due back from the planned shopping trip she'd missed. Morin listened to the cheating couple indulge in intimate pleasures and waited patiently outside the door until it opened. Then, she and her soon-to-be ex-husband settled the score. The last 15 years of her life had indeed been wasted, she thought. Jeff was right. It really is funny how time slips away. It was no surprise that about 2 weeks later, Jeff received a call at the factory from his ex-wife. He didn't believe that sly leopard Dave would ever change his spots and believed he still had a talent for hurting those around him. The fact that his ex had remained faithful and loyal all these years to that cheating bastard said only good things about her, and he was ready to bury all the old axes and help her get a fresh start in life. True to his word, he wired her money for her moving expenses, a plane ticket, and found her a nice place to stay.